Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Aqua Open Source YouTube channel. If you're watching for the first time, welcome. You can engage with the chat. However, you have to subscribe. Just FYI, subscribe to our channel, and then you can comment in the chat. Tell us who you are, if you're watching. If you have any questions, comment in the chat. Now, this is the Aqua Open Source YouTube channel, meaning we only talk about our open source tools. It's run by the open source team at Aqua, and I'm the open source developer advocate there. Now, this live stream is an interview of sorts with one of our core maintainers to one of our open source projects, Jose. I'm going to bring him onto the stream in a second. Now, I thought it would be interesting to hear from somebody who is a full-time core maintainer to an open source project, because usually when people talk about open source, right, and how to get started in open source, they are usually more on the content creation side versus on the engineering side. So I thought it would be really nice to have the opportunity to talk to Jose. And this is actually going to be part of a series. So every week or second week, we are going to bring one of our contributors onto the YouTube channel, onto the live stream. They will have different skills, different skill levels, be on different career paths and so on. And we're just going to talk about how they got started in open source, what are their suggestions, how did they do their first contributions to our open source tools and similar. So this is like a new series. Subscribe if you want to be notified about future live streams. And yeah, comment with your questions or post them in the chat. We're going to monitor the chat. So let us know if you're there. Now, let's welcome Jose. Hi, how are you doing?
Pretty good. How about you?
Awesome. So I'm good. It's summer here, so it's great. I can see it's not summer where you are, I guess.
No, it's not. Definitely not.
Amazing. Yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself, who you are, and maybe to start off with, describe your role at Aqua, your day-to-day job, just to set the scene of like who you are, what do you do for work? That might be interesting.
Okay, let me think. I don't know what I do for work. So I'm Jose. I'm from Brazil. Open source developer at Aqua. I joined recently, like 4 months ago. I think, yeah, 4 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
I started as a maintainer of the Tracee operator, and now I'm moving to the Tracee team. And my day-to-day is reviewing PRs, reviewing issues, like seeing like the great ideas people give us or the complaints about the bugs we write, because we write a lot of bugs, and help maintain the project, right? So like there are a lot of good people come to the project with ideas or with code, and we see like how we can fit it in the project, and also our own ideas, right? Like we want to see the project taking off and implementing different things. So exploring those ideas, writing POCs. So it's definitely a very fun job.
POCs are proof of concept.
Exactly.
So your work is basically divided between maintenance, reviews, and designing the new features, the new parts of the project.
Yes, exactly.
Which one do you like better? The maintenance part or the develop something new part?
Both are very cool and they're very different, right? So I think like what I like most is that I do 2 different things. It's not just one thing. So it's pretty cool to do different things, right? So one day your head is in a better place to design new feature, and some other days to review code, to test things. So it's nice to see this diversity of doing things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, before we go into how you ended up at Aqua and how you got started contributing to open source, how would you say does your current role differ from somebody with similar responsibilities in a non-open source focused projects? Right? Like you are working obviously on Tracee, you're working with certain technologies, right? How would you say you being in the open source team differs from you being within the engineering team of a similar project but not open source? How would you say that would differ? You think?
Yeah, it does differ. It's just like a little hard to describe. Let me think. So I think part is the community, right? And because like when, for example, when I was in previous company working just one project, you kind of not seeing the whole community, right? Because like as open source developer, it's not only Aqua projects, it's like other like Golang security projects in the community, right? So
Yeah.
it's not just Tracee or Trivial Operator. I'm seeing like Six Star projects, or I don't know, like Kubernetes security projects. So it's the whole security community for cloud native. So I see way more different projects. And when I was in a company, you end up like being more narrow, right? Just like the
Mhm.
project you're using or the project you're creating, right?
So the scope is much wider in the open source world, and I would imagine it's also more that you have to keep up with on a day-to-day, right? The different components, what are different other similar open source projects are doing, what is the community up to, what is coming out next, right? All those are moving components that you will have to put more focus on than if you would work in an engineering team at the enterprise
Exactly.
product.
Yeah, I think so. Like at least depending if you are like in a big team or a small team in an
Yeah.
enterprise, you have your set of responsibilities and end up like being more narrow to read, right? So here at Aqua, open source is a bigger scope. You end up seeing like different projects, and not only like I don't know, like Tracee is a runtime security project. Not only those projects, right? Like surrounding projects as well. Like again, the Six Star example is the one that in my mind right now. But
Yeah.
you end up seeing a lot of different projects.
Totally. So going back a step, where did you work before you joined the open source team at Aqua? And did you come from an open source background? Or how did you ultimately end up spending your full-time job in open source?
I would say like I always want to be a open source developer, especially because like this we are talking right now, right? I like to see like, so it was part of like after work hours for me, like testing different
Yeah.
projects, exploring different projects, reading their code, seeing what they're doing. So this was like a little hobby, right? It's fun to do it. Was not fun. It's fun to do it. Uh,
Yeah.
and before I was working at Shopify as a production engineer. So uh, I forgot the rest of the question.
How did you
So
end up at Spotify? Did you have before Spotify? Did you
no,
have an open
Shopify,
source role?
Shopify,
Shopify. Oh, Spotify.
Shopify. Yeah.
Shopify. Thank you. So before
Close
Shopify,
names.
did you have an open source role related, or
No,
was
no,
this
no.
your first full-time open source role?
Yeah, no. Aqua is the first place as that I'm working with open source, that I'm paid to work with open source, right?
Yeah.
Shopify, I was a production engineer working on the caching team. So
Yeah.
uh, we see a lot of open source there because we were using open source solutions, but again, like I was not maintaining it. I was a user, right? I was using
Yeah.
those tools.
Yeah. You were an end user versus actually the person who was
Exactly,
contributing
working
to
on
development.
those tools, which is cool as well. Like I like it a lot, especially because when you are one thing I'm noticing right now, like being a user of a open source tool gives you way more insights about like how to improve it than working on the engineering team that is writing that tool. So like
Yeah.
eating your own dog food, right? You're using it, so you see the problems, you say, oh, I should improve that. And so,
Yeah.
or when you're an end user working in a company, you see those things, you think, oh, maybe they should change this or change that. So gives a lot of insight. Like I know like probably one question you're gonna ask is like, how do you start contributing to open source? And for me, like easy, like be a user. Like when you're a user, you see so many problems that the people that are working on it are not seeing. So that's definitely a great way to start.
I guess where the difference starts to emerge is when you're a user of a project and you do something about your frustrations. That's when you become an open source contributor, versus if you're an end user and you don't do anything about the things that bug you, right? Like
Yeah.
that's, I guess, where the difference comes about. Now, there are lots of people who want to get started in open source, who want to start contributing to open source or develop their engineering skills by contributing to open source. What suggestion would you give them if they don't have much prior experience working full-time in a non-open source role? Do you think there is a disadvantage going straight into open source, or wanting to go straight into open source versus first having a full-time role at a non-open source company? Or do you what would you tell those people
Like
who are
as a
looking to get
first
started?
job.
Yeah, as a
Yeah,
first job.
as a first job, I don't know. I think because even like in a company, w- what adds up to what you can do is your experience, right? You see more
Yeah.
things, you saw different bugs, you saw different problems, and then you start to contribute better because you saw those things, right? So seeing different things when you're working any job, be it in open source or not, is an important experience. But I think like it I approach like open source in different moments of my life with different strategies. For
Mhm.
example, sometimes like for Tracee, I was really interested in learning about eBPF, and Tracee was really famous about it at the time. Was a
Mhm.
Golang project. So I decided, okay, let me start exploring this. Let me start learning the technology. I want to get better at with this project. And then you see like a missing test and you write code for that missing test. So it was more like a learning experience. And then you start to see things and you're like, oh, you see some code that could read a little better. So you refactor it, and those start to be your first PRs. This is important. And like for probably for someone as a first job, is a good way to start, right? Like just uh, something you care about, something you want to learn, and you start to studying it and seeing like things that can be improved.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what about your skill level right now? What would you say are your like the day-to-day skills that you need in your job? And what skills do you think are important to develop when you want to work in open source full time?
I think Itai is our boss. He would say like soft skills because like we talk with a lot of people. So yeah, definitely soft skills to engage. A lot of people will engage you at different times of the day with different questions, different insights, and like being able to understand it, to be empathetic about it, is definitely helps a lot, right?
Yeah.
Is and technically, I don't know, like again, this thing about learning while you're doing is very big for me. Like other open source, I want to learn, for example, I want to learn how a virtual machine works, and I start to read like JRuby code and like see how it works. And the same thing, oh, you see a missing test, you see a missing feature, and you start like to get more engaged with the project, with the contributions. So I think like you can really, if you start studying the code and like trying things out, you learn the technical skills, you see like the things you need to improve. uh so
Yeah. So in terms of building up on that, what you just mentioned in terms of improvement, people want to improve their skills. As a code reviewer, and that's what you just mentioned, part of your day-to-day, right? Reviewing other people's PR. How much do you think is your responsibility as an open source reviewer to give people feedback and help them improve as well? Like, do you think that contributing to open source is a good pathway to improving your skills and that's part of it? Or do you think the improvement should largely happen outside of the code reviews?
both. So like I got a lot of feedback that helped me. I still get a lot of feedback from people from Aqua and outside of Aqua, people like with different skill sets, and they see the a PR and they comment something that you didn't think about.
Yeah.
So definitely like the reviewing PR, getting the feedback in the PRs helps a lot. uh and also the other part, right? Like checking the code and seeing something that you don't understand and like going a little deep further to understand that part, or to, I don't know, like you see, let me think, you see a library that is used and you go down the library, see what's doing, and probably you learn more about the library and like the technology and everything, and this helps you be a better contributor to the open source you're using, right? So you want to contribute to trivial operator. If you know about like the controller runtime, probably like you have a lot of insights of things we can
Mhm.
improve in the trivial operator, right?
Yeah, totally. So um building up on that, when you're, well, let me phrase that question. No, that's what I want to
Yeah,
say.
no worries.
Um, I had like this really great question. So if somebody in the chat or somebody who's watching has a question, please post them. Now, regarding like your skills, and you just mentioned that that regarding like operator runtime, Kubernetes, and did you know the cloud native space before you started contributing to Aqua's open source cloud native projects, or is that something that kind of came to you as you started contributing? Like, do you think that people should have previous experience using cloud native tools before they start contributing to them, or is it something that can come along the way?
It's so open that it's hard to say like, oh, you need to have experience about it, right? The
Yeah.
thing is, like, if you have experience, it's good, and because there's several roles, right? Like, it's not like probably like every person will be a great guy, great coders, but like there's some people that are better on the soft skills and some people that are better with ideas. So it's so open. It really depends. I didn't know like Kubernetes, cloud native. I was using it on my day to day, and it helped me with Tracee, for example, because like when I first started to study Tracee, my first
Yeah.
contributor like, oh, I want to run this on Kubernetes, and but I don't know, it doesn't have Liveness Probe, so let me implement it to help the project. So for this case, definitely for me was great. But like if someone didn't knew it and was just running on their computer as well, and find that on my Ubuntu 20 it's not working, and then debug it and see the reason not working, he'll also be able to contribute back to the project with a different skill set.
Yeah, that makes sense. No, we have a question by, I don't know how to pronounce your name, Shubham? I hope I pronounce it right. What do you think should be the right path to take after solving a good first issue? Like, what's a perfect second issue to get more involved? So a lot of projects, I think us including, we have some good first starter issues, right? Now, depending on the project, you will find different projects will have already within the good first starter issue different difficulty levels, right? Like some projects, they are really easy to get started with some contributing to their website, to their docs, with some HTML or so on. But other projects, obviously, depending on their implementation and just specs, it might be more difficult to with the first starter issue. But once you have, I guess, once you feel comfortable with the first issues, how do you get involved then? Like, what would you suggest people to make that step, or how did you make that step as well? Like, I guess a lot of people, they have the problem of like, how do I ultimately get involved beyond claiming an issue that's nobody interested in, right? Like that's the easiest to see, okay, this issue nobody's interested in, I'm just going to do it, right? But then from there, how do you get involved in a conversation and integrate yourself in the project?
Yeah, this like the way I did. Okay, so to help in the project, the more context you have, the more you can help, right? So
Yeah.
if you never use the project, you don't know, like you can read out the issues and like you don't even know what they mean, right? So like your first issue is important because it's when you set up the development environment and everything, so you can actually start to contribute to it. But then like what to do later, I think a lot about like what Martin Fowler says on his book about, I think like it's the refactoring book, where he says like he writes tests to understand the code, right? So one
Yeah.
thing I usually do when I start to like to contribute some project I don't know much about, like I want to understand. So I run like go per coverage test too. I see tests that are missing and I try to write tests for them, and this will give me insight on the internals of the code base, right? Uh,
Yeah.
uh, I usually think it's harder unless you have you are a user of the project and you know what the project is doing really well. You see issues and you understand what the issues is asking. When you're not a user and you don't understand, you need to understand the project, right? So like writing tests and refactoring for me always is what helps me understand better the internals, and then this starts to give me different insights, right? I did it for Minikube, I did it for Tracee. Was like run like see what is the coverage. Oh, this test is missing, let's add a test for that. This other test is missing, and you start to learn more and more about the internals, and then having your own ideas or seeing an issue and saying, oh, this bug might be related to that, and then like you can more easily fix it.
Yeah, totally. Also, what a lot of people suggest is that you see the kind of issues that people bring up. Like, for example, if something is not working on their installation, right? That you try to reproduce it for the maintainers, and you maybe provide additional information on the way you reproduce the issue, right? Anything that can take work basically off the core maintainers is very, very useful to the project, right? Um,
Yeah, that makes sense.
and that's I guess also a way to generate tests and like understand the project further. So thank you, Chopin, for asking the question. It's a great question. If anybody else wants to ask a question, either right now while you're watching live, please comment it in the chat, and we're happy to bring the question on. Um, or if you're watching the recording of this live stream, then comment it below and we will answer it in our next live stream. Now I remembered the previous question I had that I originally forgot. So a lot of people within our open source team at Aqua have side pet projects, or also projects that are highly related to their work at Aqua. How important do you think, first of all, is it to have your own open source projects before getting a full-time role? Or how important is it to contribute to open source before getting a full-time role within the open source space? Do you think it's important to keep your side projects alive?
Like side project, I like side project a lot, but like my approach to side projects is also to learn. So I create something. Let's do a compiler for scheme to, I don't know, WebAssembly, something like that. And I started, I get the idea, and then
Yeah.
I ignore it because like I learned what I wanted to learn with it. And for some of those projects, it is on my GitHub, for example, if people go look. But I never like create my own project and maintained it, and uh like that was my full idea, my everything. And I think like it really depends, because depends like on your day to day, on your job, right? So uh I didn't, I can say like I didn't, I was more trying to like to help existing projects than start to have an idea to create my own. Like was more about getting a project that was I cared about, that I want to learn about, and like try to help it by understand, by giving ideas, by commenting on the issues, and eventually with code.
Yeah. So moving on further to the career side of things, away from the like skills and process of contributing. Now, how do you find roles that either support contributing to open source? So there are like some roles that, right, they have like a percentage. They say 30% of your time can be spent contributing to open source, versus for you 100% of your time is spent contributing to open source. Now, how did you come across the role at Aqua? How do you come into the hiring funnel, I guess? And how would you now, if you hypothetically would be looking for a job, how would you approach finding another job it complete that's open source focus, like just for people who are getting started? If in case our manager is watching, it's just like to tell others, right? Like how do you approach that, right?
I know like there are a lot of famous company that have like open source jobs, right? Like several different companies. Uh, I don't know, like my experience with Aqua was different, right? It was like I started to contribute to the project before knowing there was a position to
Yeah.
work as a developer on that project. So like I didn't even know like they were hiring open source developer. I just like wanted to contribute to the project because I was studying it, learning it, and eventually someone from the Aqua team got in touch and said, "Hey, we have this position. Maybe you want to apply
Yeah.
and see." So, but I don't know if I was to look now for another open source role, like if I was actively looking for it, maybe like see the companies that support it, from like a lot of companies like Aqua support it from the beginning, right? You see it on their talks, you see on their blog posts, and
Yeah.
see like one that fits with me, start learning about it, right? Start contributing, start helping. Uh, However you feel comfortable, like contributing, like it's not just you don't need to know exactly, like when contribute to Tracee, I was just studying BPF, which is the core technology inside Tracee, right? I was not like I didn't know a lot about it. I was just exploring, but I was able to like help on the sides, give some ideas and test it and
Mhm.
see some bugs. Oh, it didn't run on my computer. Why it didn't run on my computer? Debug it and like create a PR for that. So and this, like again, like the more context you have about the project, the more you can help, right? I think being an enterprise, that's probably the big difference, because like when you joined, you have to learn about that project, and you're 8 hours a day for the next several months you'll be working that project, so you start to get
Yeah.
a lot of context and a lot of context about how that project works, what are the problems or not, and then you can like really contribute to it. And it's the same for open source. Like the more you learn about it, the more context you have about the project, the more insights you have about how to help it.
And the more valuable you become to the project, right?
Yeah.
Like we have lots of contributors who are not full-time hired by Aqua to contribute to the open source tools, but they are say, like when somebody is replaceable and they're super valuable to our projects, right? And to the health of the project and to anything related, right? And that's actually also something that I saw when I was working full-time in the open source blockchain space, that everybody, all of the engineers that we did hire, those were ultimately people whom we saw already contributing to our projects and whom we saw had the skills. And it makes the hiring process probably a lot easier as well if you already know, okay, this person can do X, Y, Z, right? Especially like with you, you are, I don't know, halfway across, like 1/3 across the world from me, right? And from
Yeah.
our manager. He can't sit next to you and guide you through the project, right? Like you need to have being proactive and have the experience and the skills to contribute by yourself, right? Which puts you in a different setting and also like different hiring priorities than if you would be able to get somebody into the office to have a whiteboard session or something like.
Agree. It definitely helps hiring, right? Like it's an interview by itself, you can say, right? Because you see like someone is already like creating issue with their own ideas and like writing code that solve those issues. So you definitely see something there already, right?
Yeah, yeah. We have related to that, I think. Another question by Chopin. Thank you for asking. That's great. For getting involved, what do you suggest? Get in depth of one tool, such as Tracee, or distribute myself and explore various tools, such as Tracee, as well, and contribute equally to all? Like broad or narrow focus? What would you suggest people to do?
Yeah, again, it's hard to say because there are different spirits. Like mine, like the more context you have about one tool, the better it is for you to really contribute to it, right?
Mm.
So I don't know. I would like if he's like working on Trivy right now, understand the internal, like writing tests to understand the internals, find places to refactor. Will give him a lot of insights, and very soon he'll be creating a lot of issues about the problems he see on the project, and will I think it will make like him an effective contributor sooner than like looking several other tools, because it takes time to understand a code base, right? It's like, at least for me, it takes time to understand, like
Yeah.
really understand it, what it's doing, the design and everything. It takes time. It's not the again the difference between an enterprise, like in enterprise you are on that 8 hours a day every day, right? So it's you usually learn faster, not fast, but like you learn what you have to do and how to do it. But like if you're doing open source on the side, like you're doing at night, usually you have a couple hours only, right? You have like 30 minutes here, one hour there. So you don't have like 8 hours to sit down in front of a computer and just explore one tool and like get better at it.
Totally. Also, I guess specifically to Trivy, Trivy has already like 20 different projects that it's dependent on, that are integrated in some way within a project, right? So understanding all of those different projects and the details of it and the dependencies is already such a big task, right?
Yeah.
So I would, I guess, suggest if you want to contribute to multiple projects, find related projects versus a project that really has a completely different structure or goal. Because in that case, if you have related projects, you can already transfer like some of the skills
Yeah.
and over in some of them.
Yeah, I totally can see it. Like Trivy and Tracee are very different, right? Like scanning and like the runtime security. So, but probably Trivy and Trivy Kubernetes, they're much closer to each other and what they do. So,
Yeah,
agree.
yeah, totally. Now we have one question Aqua related in the chat. And then I have one last question. If somebody who's viewing has another question to Jose or to myself or about Aqua or open source projects related, please post them in the chat now. If you have to be subscribed for any amount of time, and then you can comment in the chat. If you're watching the re-recording, comment it below in the comments anyways, so we can address it in one of the future live streams. And the question is Aqua fully remote or do you have offices? So the open source team is mainly remote. I would say completely remote because there's only an option to go to the office if you're close to an office, but it's not a requirement for the open source team to be in proximity of the office. Now, Aqua has two main offices, one in Boston, in the US, and one in Tel Aviv. Now, the main engineering team is based in Tel Aviv. So if you are an engineer, then you would want to be in the Tel Aviv office. Otherwise, I would assume. But it's not like it's generally not a requirement within Aqua to be close to the office. It's like a semi-remote, I would say. It's like my perception.
Yeah,
But
for
we are full
example,
remote in open source.
yeah, I'm in Brazil fully remote. Anais is England fully remote.
I'm in England. Three of us are in England from the open source team.
Yeah, two of us are in Brazil. So,
Two are in Brazil, one is in the US, somebody's in Canada, and three are in Tel Aviv
exactly.
so far. Let's see if we can find somebody who's in Australia or somewhere completely different. That might make meetings interesting. Awesome. So, my last question is, what would be your main advice in any format related to your role? Like if you would give your past self 3 years ago one main piece of advice, what would that be?
Definitely like go to open source relate to interest, right? So I I tried that sometimes, like because of seeing like positions to open source contribute to a project that like was not I was not really interested on it. Was not like, oh, like I love what this project is doing. It's not was bad or nothing, but like usually you have like preference on what you like to study, right? And when it's something that you really care about, it makes things so much easier, right? Like because you like to study it, the project is about
Yeah,
it, so it really is like. It helps you go faster, understand, and like definitely helping the project becoming more effective in the project.
definitely. That is a great piece of advice. I don't have any further questions right now, but if somebody who is watching has any more questions, either comment in below, we will address them in future live streams, or join our open source Slack channels, also linked below. Also linked below are Jose's GitHub, and so you can see what he's actually doing on a day-to-day basis. and
Follow me.
and your Twitter account. So I'm sure Jose would probably also be happy to answer your questions in our open source channels on Slack. Just jump in there. It's a friendly group of people. If you're curious about contributing to Aqua, maybe start using our open source projects, check them out. Anything related to cloud native security, container security, runtime security, and take it from there. Yeah, thank you so much,
Yeah.
Jose. This was great.
Sure, no problem. I enjoyed it. And like anyone want to contribute to Trivia Operator or maybe Tracee, let me know. I can like. I think one of the things I had when start to contribute to open source is the help of the maintainers. Like when you're maintaining a project, you really interested in help, right? So like Itai from Aqua, he really helped me to get into it. Other maintainers for other projects, for example, Media from Minikube, when I was contributing to it, he really helped me as well, like to get to a very knowledgeable level of how to help the project. So definitely reach out. I would like to help someone else like I was helped. So
Yeah, awesome. Reach out to us if you want to get involved with our open source tools, contributing to them. Maybe you can be then on one of our future live streams and talk about your contributor experience. Next week, we actually have somebody come on who just filed his first PR to Trivy. So we're going to talk about how he got started. He's very early in his career, from what I understand. So it will be kind of a different chat. But yeah, really excited to hear about his experience. And yeah, please do reach out. Links are below. Have an amazing day, everybody. Thank you, Jose.
All right,
Bye.
thank you.
Bye.